Yum, yum!
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Modo with Ellery, and in this episode, we're going to be looking at sculpting. Now, a couple of disclaimers as we get started here. This isn't a sculpting tutorial per se. I'm not going to be talking about, how to sculpt the best, character faces or anything like that. We are going to be looking at some sculpting techniques, but we are mostly going to be looking at how to optimize your sculpting workflow inside of Modo to better take advantage of the sculpting that it does offer. And then the second disclaimer is if you're coming and expecting, the sculpting engine inside of Modo to be ZBrush, you're going to be disappointed. That's not the point here, but the point is to look at what is going on with the sculpting engine so that we can better understand it and use it so that you can get better responsiveness out of the sculpting, and also use it in order to really get the stuff done that you need to. And in many instances, you can use this for a lot of really good sculpting work inside of Modo, even on really heavy poly counts. So to get started here, we're going to start just with this quad ball sphere that's subdivided here, and right now we're looking at 9,400 triangles. Not a lot of subdivision here. We're going to go ahead and turn on our sculpting tools and turn on multi-resolution. And the big thing to understand here is really what's going on with multi-resolution sculpting. So if I turn multi-resolution off, and we sculpt here. So if I just get a brush size and I click and drag, what's going on, and here I'm going to turn symmetry off because we don't need it. What's going on, let's turn our offset up a bit here, is that we're taking and we're pushing points outward. And without multi-resolution on, we're limited to just pulling the actual vertices that exist on the mesh, the vertices and edges and polygons, and moving those around, really. So this is basically just like a soft manipulation mode at this point, and that's all it's doing, just moving those vertices out. Now, when we have subdivision surfaces, the idea, of course, is that we take each polygon, and for one subdivision level, we divide that polygon by 4, and then for another subdivision level, we divide each of those polygons by 4. So each time we quadruple the number of implied polygons in the scene, and those are going to be the polygons that give us the smoothed appearance of subdivision surfaces. Now with multi-resolution, we're actually then sculpting on the implicit polygons that exist with subdivision surfaces. So when we turn this on and we get a little smaller brush, instead of just being able to sculpt on the points that are right here on this polygon, I can sculpt on the implied points. So we can see this starting to pop up. But since right now we only have, at this point, 16 polygons filling up this surface, you can see that it's not really working very well because it's low resolution. All right, so this should be no news to anybody, but bear with me here. So if we zoom out here, we can see that, okay, yeah, we can start to do a little bit of very rudimentary sculpting at this level, but we don't get very much. So let's start moving up. So let's hop up another level. So now each of our polygons, instead of having 16, now has 64 polygons inside of it. So we get a finer level of sculpting ability, but we're looking at 40,000 polygons. Okay, let's continue and let's move up here another 2 levels to level 5, which now we're going to be looking at over 500,000 polygons, so 600,000 polygons. And at this level, we can start to come in and actually make some fairly fine-tuned sculpting, right? Now, here's one thing to keep in mind. As you get to a new level of subdivision for your multi-resolution sculpting, pay attention to what the polygon limit is. And by that I mean, if we look here and we get a good angle, we can see that we've got polygons showing up here. And actually here, let's switch over to our gooch tone so we can see this a bit better. So we can actually start to see polygons, right? So it means we're really sculpting at a detail level beyond the threshold of what our current subdivision is allowing. So when we can see polygons, we're basically sculpting on more resolution than we have at this point. So if I zoom out a little bit, you can see, okay, so about here, we're seeing polygons. If I zoom out a little bit more, we go maybe here, it starts to get a little bit smoother. So this is going to be something that's going to work a little bit better, right? Let me take my steps down. There we go. So pay attention as you begin to increase your levels to the amount of detail that you actually have available. And so we can see what's going on here. I'm going to turn on my GL meter. GL meter typed in down here, if you didn't know, will give you your current frames per second. So just manipulating, you know, I get extremely high frame rates here. This is not a big deal. It's not hard to just manipulate the viewport. But as we start to sculpt is where we should see a hit if there's going to be one. And right now I'm hanging around 40, 50, sometimes up to 60 frames per second. Okay, so that's not a problem. And we're on 600,000 polygons. Now, just so we can kind of continue this discussion here, let's look now and back down a couple of levels. So I'm backing down to level 3 now. And you can see that we still see the idea of some of these details, but the details themselves are largely washed out. Let's go one more level down. Now, when we go down to level 2, you can see that while the details are there, they really, there's nothing you can really see about the details. You just see that there is some sculpting that's gone on there. So this is important because if we're working at a lower subdivision level, we can still edit the mesh underneath, but what's going to happen is it's only going to affect the mesh at the subdivision level that we're currently on, and it's going to retain any of the higher polygon details that exist at other levels. It's going to keep those so that when we step back up, they're still going to exist, but they're going to be deformed by what's going on in the lower subdivision levels. So as you begin to add subdivision levels, it's important to add them as you need them. You know, if you take, and we'll see here, we're going to sculpt on the old man head here in a minute, but if you take your sculpting and you immediately jump up to, you know, level 8 and you're looking at 30 million polygons, if you manage things right, you can go in at that level and you can sculpt fairly well. But if you want to go out and make larger form changes and you back down to level 2 or level 3 or even level 4, you're going to notice something is going to happen here. So like, for example, let's go in here. I'm just going to go to a clean side of this sphere here, and I'm going to zoom in a bit. And in this case, I'm going to use just kind of a noise brush, and so we just get a little bit more lumpiness out of this because I just want to add in some kind of random detail here so we can have stuff that's recognizable. Okay, so we've got all this in there. We're above the detail level that we would want to go here on level 5, but we get the idea here. So now if I back down to level 2, now watch what happens here. So I'm going to take and I'm going to displace this entire section here. Actually, let's go to our move tool here. At lower subdivision levels, your move tool is going to be a really good one to use. So I'm going to pull this part out, and watch, as soon as I release the mouse button, there is like a split second delay that then the mesh clicks in. Now our highest subdivision level is not that high at this point, so the click is not a real big one. All right, but as you continue adding more and more levels of subdivision, when you back off on your subdivision levels, between each stroke that you make, because it has to take into account the detail that exists in higher levels, it's going to cause a lag or a delay between each individual stroke. So keep that in mind and build up, you have to build up your levels of detail in a layered fashion and really kind of do your best to adhere to that, because otherwise the sculpting performance is going to get really laggy. And that's one of the things that will give you some real details. Okay, let's actually click up here another level. This is going to put us at 2.4 million polygons, and let's go up one more level. All right, so now we're going to be at close to 10 million polygons. Now, the other thing to remember here is that you should be trying to sculpt at the level that suits your current level of polygonal detail, right? So if I zoom in here right now, and let's get image ink on, and I'm just going to pick, let's do these scales here. All right, so I'm at a fairly high subdivision level right now, and I'm going to turn on image ink. Let's move this off to the side here. And I'm just going to sculpt right in here, and we'll give it a second because it always takes a second on the initial click. Oops, I'm still on my move tool. Hold on a second here. Let's go back to the push tool. It's always going to take a second here at your initial click on a new subdivision level to be able to define it. So just something to keep in mind here. And it looks like we're getting really faceted, but that's okay. So this is actually not giving us a really good representation with this image here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my image ink, and let's just zoom in here so you can kind of see the level of detail that we actually have. So, oh no, I guess it is about the right level of detail. I was subdivided less than I thought I was. So here, let's zoom out here. So we can sit here and we can sculpt on this, and we can start to get fairly good levels of detail. And keep an eye on my frames per second as I'm sculpting here. You know, it's hanging in really high numbers, even though I've got a 10 million polygon mesh. But notice that I'm sculpting on a fairly small area of this. Now, I could come out here and I could sculpt on this part too. But as I zoom out and try to affect more and more polygons, you can see that was a pretty small swath of area that I was working on here. If I come out here and try to affect a large chunk of this mesh that would be better suited at a lower subdivision level, notice what happens to my frames per second. Now we're down to under 10. Okay. Now if I come out here and we go even higher, you know, say I want to make a large, really large scale change here, we're going to be looking at 2 frames per second, something like that, and it's not going to work very well, right? So what I am going to do here is, now if we take this exact idea here, and there's my brush size, and I jump down to level 3, now watch. My actual sculpting here, and once it kicks in, is going to be at a very high level. You know, we're still coming in 40, 50, sometimes it'll drop to 20, but you get the idea. So, you know, nice, good quality frame rate. As soon as I let go of the mouse button though, notice that lag. That lag is getting more and more significant because I have higher and higher subdivision levels laying on top of it. Okay, so let's real quickly take this over and try to apply it to a real project here. So I've got the old man head here, and this is mostly the stock old man head with a couple of changes. He is changed now to Catmull Clark subdivisions. The eyes have been removed and placed in a new layer and actually been modified to look a little bit more like real eyes. So they look a little bit better. And he has the skin material from the episode where we talked about materials. So so he's got a little bit more than just the basic old man head. But if you don't have the file to work along with, you can always just load up the old man head from the stock content in Modo. But I would really recommend taking the eyes and putting them in a fresh mesh. Now the main reason for this is that as we increase the subdivision level, we look here, the eyes by themselves have 40,000 polygons, and the rest of the mesh is only another 100,000. So nearly a third of our mesh weight is going to be in the eyes if we leave them in and we keep subdividing up. So it's useless polygons because we're not going to end up sculpting on the eyeballs. If you want to sculpt on the eyeballs, you know, more power to you, but we're not going to do that in this case. Okay, so right now, let's start looking here. I'm going to pull up the Move tool, and I'm going to have my multi-resolution on. And at level 2, again, we're really good for doing kind of higher level stuff. So let's turn our symmetry on here, and let's turn him into an elf/Vulcan something. And at level 2, helps if you have the right layer selected. At level 2, you can actually make some fairly decent changes like this. This is where you're going to make these higher order changes, changes to your character's features, you know, stuff like that. If you're sculpting something like a planet, you know, this would be where you would be working on continents, you know, here, level 2, level 3, this is where you would do that kind of work, right? You don't want to go too high because then you start ending up with those problems where when you're dealing at a really high subdivision level and working on a large area of your mesh, it's just going to kill the frame rate. All right, so as we're working here, we're getting really good frame rates because, you know, we're only working on, at the moment, 64,000 polygons, right? So now let's see. So other changes that we could make here, and let me make sure that my inactive meshes are visible. Oh yeah, in my eyes I want to see them so that I can kind of make some adjustments to my eyelids here. So you're going to get decent performance as you work in appropriate levels of subdivision. Is kind of one of the big takeaways that that I want to go with here. And I think this is something that's important to remember. Now with ZBrush, you know, obviously it's a totally different beast in the way that it works and the way the sculpting engine works. So you can expect different results. And that's why I said at the beginning, you know, if you come into this expecting Modo to be ZBrush, you know, you're going to be disappointed. But if you use the tools where they do have good speed, then you're going to be pretty happy here. So let's go ahead and turn subdivision off because I want to kind of edit the eyes separately here. kind of open this one up a little bit more. And I'm just making like little changes here. Like I said, this is not a tutorial on sculpting as much as it is a tutorial on how to get better performance out of your sculpting. Because I think that's a really important thing, and there are a lot of good, talented sculptors out there that maybe could do better work if they, if they have the tools behaving at their best. So let's go ahead and do that. This eye a little bit more closed. And that's all I'm going to do on this level. Okay. This would also be a level, where you could, add in like, oops, little facial expressions, a little bit of a smirk here or something. Okay. So now as we move on, let's kind of try to identify the level of detail that's appropriate at each of these levels. So I find that it's a really good idea to take each level and do a little test look and see, okay, obviously I can't get that high level here. So really this level that I'm at, I could probably just do more of the large feature details, but I'm going to skip right past that and move on up here. So at this level, as we can start to see some slightly smaller details coming in. So if I wanted to put in some things where, maybe I wanted to affect, some of the skin down here, I could probably go in and add in some extra, kind of folds and things down here, kind of larger stuff like that. Now, another thing is also remember that your smooth tool, as you're working, the higher resolution you are, the less your smooth tool is going to affect the lower resolutions. So just a side note there. Okay, so let's keep moving on up. Now we're at 1 million polygons, means our next one is going to take us up to 4 million polygons. And at this point, we're actually, let's see, let's get a quick look here. I just kind of want to see here. Oops. There's that initial click that always takes a little longer. And we're still at a little bit low level here. So I'm actually going to be kind of leapfrogging a few levels here. So we're going to jump right up. Now we're going to be looking at about 16 million polygons. So each subdivision level will also take a little bit of time to adapt and roll onto the surface of your model. I'm trying to not edit out any of the pauses in between, just so you can see that stuff does take a while, even though once we get going it works pretty well. So now we're at 16 million polygons, and this is going to be a pretty good depth here, where if I get something like the carve tool, I can start to get in some nice wrinkles here. So let's go in here again, give it a second, because that first click is always going to take a moment to initialize. And it will take a little bit more with each subsequent subdivision level, so just be patient. Okay, there we go. So now we can start to see that this is at a level where I can get some decent wrinkles here. So I'm going to do some wrinkles in the eyes. Okay, and there will be a slight delay also as you get to higher subdivision levels between each click. So it's going to take it a second to kind of optimize the mesh for what you've just done. But the actual stroke itself should be fairly clean. See, I'm still dealing with pretty high frame rates here. All right, so that's good. Let's go down here. I'm going to look at kind of accentuating some of the folds that are already in the mesh here. So let's just add in a few more kind of wrinkles coming off of here. And like I said, I'm not going to go nuts here because that's not really the point of this tutorial. And this time I've got symmetry off because I'm just going to sculpt on one side and leave the other side as is so we can kind of get a good idea. So let's come down through here, and I want this to be a little bit more craggly, with a couple of off-shooting wrinkles coming across the eye here. And, notice that with each stroke, I'm just giving a second in between clicking and going on to the next one. I'm just kind of planning ahead what I'm doing instead of just trying to make one sculpt after another. You'll notice that your frame rate is really going to drop if you start to kind of bogging the engine down and trying to go stroke, 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 stroke. If you keep your strokes a little bit more deliberate, you can end up with, really nice detail. And let's see, that's probably didn't want some of those. So let's go and smooth some of these out. But you can see here, going along with my smooth tool, I'm aiming at 50, 60 frames per second. So this is working pretty well. Okay. All right, so there we get the general idea there, okay? So then let's look at just one subdivision level farther. And I'm going to go ahead and click it up before I start to explain. Yes, I'm going to exceed my subdivision count, I know. Okay, so as we get to the really high level, at this level, I honestly believe that what we're going to get out of here could be very easily supplanted with a bump map, or a normal map in that case. So this is the kind of thing that the actual the disturbance of the surface is going to be so minor at this level that you could use a nice quality bump map and you're really not going to notice much of the difference. But just so you can see, what really does work well at this level is going to be very, very minute changes to our surface. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that as you do this on these higher subdivision levels, again, make sure that you're thinking about the relative change in the surface. So if I'm dealing with just moving around these polygons themselves, if I'm modeling this and I were to take the polygons on the nose and I was going to move a vertex out, I wouldn't move a vertex on the nose from the bridge all the way out here and expect it to look good because it's going to be stretching the model so much. And really, you can think about sculpting the implicit polygons pretty much in the same way. If you take any individual implied polygon, and those are going to be the ones that you're sculpting on, and you try to displace them a much greater degree away from the surface than the size of the actual polygon, then you're going to end up with some undesirable results. And it's important to remember this as you're sculpting between the different levels. Now, I actually had a hiccup in Hang here that it dumped a bunch of my recording while I was actually doing the sculpting at this level, so I don't have the recording of the sculpt, but we're going to skip ahead to where I do have some sculpting actually done on this character, and you can actually see the result of sculpting at this level. So if we look at this here, and now we can zoom in, you can see that what I'm getting here is that this is using image ink, and so I'm getting texture down in here. Now I know this isn't physically accurate for this old man's skin. Like I said, this is more of a proof of concept than anything else, but you can see here, if I get really far in, you can finally start to see the polygons break down at that level. And this is when we're so close to the character that you really can't even tell the difference. And we'd have to be this close to be able to see any kind of actual surface disturbance that's going on here. So in this way, really you're not going to be getting anything much better than a bump map or perhaps a displacement map, but really I don't even think a displacement map is going to be necessary in order to get this level of detail. Pardon, there are some little bits of stretching there, but just so you know, when I'm working on this without the recording on, which, like I said, crashed and dumped my video, when I was using just regular sculpt tools, so push, the smooth brush, the clay or the carve, scar tools, all those tools, I was getting somewhere around 15 frames per second when I was sculpting on this level of detail and sculpting the appropriate level of detail. So that's going to be things even smaller than some of these lines up by the eyes and these wrinkles. This is going to be things around the level of the work that's done here with the image ink. So working with image ink was a little bit slower. I was looking somewhere at around 5 frames per second, but you have to remember that with image ink, you're doing less detailed, precise work anyway. The idea is to let the image itself do a lot of the heavy lifting. So you're placing and adjusting the scale and the rotation of your image, and then you're just painting simple strokes that go through it to apply the texture onto it. Now, if you did want to actually sculpt at this level of detail using image ink, using your traditional sculpting tools or whatever, really this actually all sort of starts to bog down your render engine. So in my opinion, it's the best thing that if you want to be able to get this kind of a level and you want to do it this way with sculpting, you'd be better off taking it after the fact and then baking it down to a normal map using a much lower resolution version of your character. You could still have something subdied, but probably somewhere around a level 3, maybe a level 4 sculpt, which is going to be hundreds of thousands of polygons as opposed to millions or tens of millions. And you're going to get really in the end a very similar result, if not better. All right, so hopefully this is helpful to some of you who are working in sculpting and experiencing some frustration with the sculpting tools. I know that as I started to burrow down deeper into this, I was starting to find some of the strengths and relative limitations of the tool. Remember that as you move up and down levels, that is going to cause issues where you're going to get lag and slowdown as you begin to work on whatever the new level is, whether you're going to a higher resolution or if you're stepping back down. So this is at level 7 right now, and if I were to back down to, say level 3 or 4 to adjust the ears, I'm going to be able to sculpt with relative fluidity in the individual stroke. So I could take the ear and pull it down, but then it's going to have a lag, a very significant lag once you get to this level in between strokes where it's recalculating all of the higher order details to align with the changes that you've made at the lower order. So sculpt in layers, begin at the lower levels to be able to get the roughed out details that you want, and then increase the levels of detail as you need them in order to get the higher level. Now, once you get here to this level, I don't think that this is necessary. I think you would be much better off setting up some good textures, perhaps setting this up with some UDIMs so that you have multiple sections to deal with different parts of the object, and you have those at different resolutions, and then painting in bump maps is really going to give you a very similar end result. But in the end, you can take and do this and have relatively decent control if you work with the tools the way that they have their strengths. So if you like this video or videos like it, please feel free to like, follow, and subscribe. You can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/Ellery, where you can get downloadable versions of the videos as well as downloadable source files for all of the things included in this video. Or if you'd like to get this video or any other episode of Modo with Ellery a la carte, you can get those on Gumroad at gumroad.com/Ellery. Also, there are going to be some new things starting with this video, so do make sure that you check the links in the video description, as I have some special things for all of you guys. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this. Now go make something cool, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yum, yum!